Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, we've been having quite a discussion up here because I'm learning how it all works. I'm getting a crash course in visual effects. It's complicated, but Jeff will explain it all to you. Jeff, I'm excited about chatting with you, but I know that you wanted to start with just a little portfolio of the work that you've done, so you can take it away.
That'd at least be good to sort of introduce our conversation. Hopefully this plays. As you can see, we do a lot of romantic comedies.
Wow. So based on that, it looks like you have the coolest job ever.
It is pretty amazing.
So let's just start at the beginning. And, you know, when you were a kid, was it like your dream to be the next George Lucas or something like that? Like, how did it all begin for you?
I was never interested in being the director part of George Lucas. I was always interested in computer graphics and visual effects. And I think so many of us that work at ILM were just inspired by the movies that we watched growing up. So for me, it was the Jurassic Park, it was Star Wars, but I mean, I loved Lawnmower Man just because it had this, you know, really incredible computer graphics work in it. And one of the really fun things about being at ILM is that there are people that have been there for 20 to 30 years. So you can actually ask them about these movies, you know, that I went to see when I was a kid.
The ones that inspired you when you were growing up to do what you do now.
Yeah.
So as a kid, though, you loved computer graphics and computer science, and you studied filmmaking, but you couldn't draw.
No, still can't really draw. Everybody finds their own way into this industry, and I think what's so amazing about it is that it really is this incredible combination of people that come from very strong art backgrounds, people that come from technical backgrounds, and people that go back and forth. And what's neat is that you have people that were sculptors and painters and traditional model makers all have sort of made the transition into working digitally, and just execute their art in a different way.
So just let's delve a little bit deeper into your background. So where did you go to school, and what was the journey that you took to get here today?
I grew up in upstate New York in a small town called Ithaca, which is famous for Cornell University, but I actually went to the other school, which was Ithaca College. But I studied film, and I minored in computer science, and those ended up being a really nice combination for working in this industry, because even though so much of the work we do is computer-based and it is very technical, we're really collaborating with the filmmakers. And so if you can sort of speak the language with them around cameras and around staging and framing and sort of what you want to traditionally know to make a film, it really helps inform the visual effects process.
Do you remember, one of the first projects that you did maybe back then in your school days?
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of effects that you, do you look back on it?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was at Ithaca College, there wasn't really a formal computer graphics program at all. And so we sort of home rolled our own. And we both, all of my friends worked for the computing facility at the college. And so we would set up our render farm across the entire network that would run at night, unbeknownst to anybody else, except if we forgot to turn it off in the morning when everybody was coming in trying to browse on Netscape 1.0, it just absolutely killed the machines there. So that was kind of our early start.
Computer science. So what was the project that you had, and do you still look back on it and sort of think, if I could do it again, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was, we made a far too large, far too ambitious project for essentially what was my senior film in college. And it ended up being 8 minutes long, and really it should have been 30 seconds. But, we hadn't really mastered the art of editing at that point.
Yeah.
But it was such a great sort of introduction, partially into what this industry takes. It's always a lot of hard work, and it's always pretty long hours to get these projects out the door. But really, for the artist, it becomes this passion project in order to complete the work.
Well, I'm sure some of the projects we just saw on your demo reel would take years to complete, I would think. So looking back to when you were going to university and to now, how much has changed in technology in the film industry?
It's pretty amazing how different and how the same it is. I think the fundamental underpinnings of the way we worked 10 or 15 years ago are partially still true, but the technology has changed completely. And our new sort of head of ILM sort of recently quoted saying, if you look at the movie Pearl Harbor, which we did quite a few years ago, everything in that we rendered, you could now render in real time. And that's kind of the difference in the technology. Whereas back then it took us hundreds and hundreds of hours to do the movie. So I think what that really means, though, is the work is still difficult. It just means that people can iterate more. And ultimately, that's what makes visual effects work good, is artists having the time to do those iterations.
And you can make it look more real. And because some of the stuff that I saw, I don't know that I would have, other than, King Kong, I realized that he's not
That was
real.
the only real thing in the shot.
Okay, so it was mentioned in the introduction to you that you're an Academy Award nominee, but you won an Oscar as well.
It's a scientific and a technical Oscar, which is sort of the part of the Oscars they go through very quickly. But it's really, it was
it's one more Oscar than I have, that's for sure.
It was a huge honor, and the show was hosted by Patrick Stewart this year, which was, for me, the highlight, of course.
Oh, yeah. Jean-Luc Picard, I'd be all over that. So it was for a specific technology, though, that you and your team developed. Tell us about what that was.
Sure. I actually brought along a couple of quick slides just because it's more fun to have some visuals. So the whole idea that we got the SciTech for was this rigging system called Block Party. I don't know if my slides are still working. So when we're creating creatures, we're always trying to get all this complexity. You can see as the cheetah's running, it's all moving and jiggling. You see the muscles under the skin, and that's quite difficult for us to do in computer graphics. And so what we worked on, and this was now 10 years ago when we started this, was how can we get to that faster? So our idea was if we need to make a gorilla, if we just figure out sort of what goes into a human, then we can resculpt the human and then tell the computer, okay, now make all the stuff I need to essentially create a gorilla. And that includes even all the bones under the skin and all the muscles and things, or we tested it with clothing. And so that was kind of the whole idea behind Block Party. Now, we started that 10 years ago and worked on it for several years, and then thankfully it was passed off to the research and development team at ILM, who is incredibly smart and much more capable programmers than my friend I did that with. Right. So they took it much farther than we could have ever imagined.
So you and your friend began with the idea and played around with it, and they brought it to that. And did you thank them in your Oscar acceptance?
Well, they were with us.
Oh, okay.
Because it was actually the four of us that got the award, and we were very grateful. And that's one of the really fun things about being at ILM is it's a place where everybody can have these ideas, and then they can sort of grow and grow organically because there's so much talent there.
Yeah, you've got a big team and you've got little, specialty teams, and
Yep.
we'll get into some of that. I want to talk a bit about Kong, Skull Island. That's the one you were nominated for this year, right?
Yep.
So King Kong obviously is, this iconic creature, and everyone has an idea of what King Kong looks like and what King Kong should look like, and he's been reproduced many times over the years. How do you approach dealing with, and you've done that in many other of your projects as well, how do you approach creating or recreating a creature or a superhero who is so well known in popular culture, and try to stay true to what that character is supposed to be, but bring it to a year 2018 or 2017 level?
It's incredibly scary.
Yeah, I bet.
And the question of what should Kong look like is the same struggle we had with what should Optimus Prime look like and what should the Hulk look like. I think with each of them, you are in with an incredible team of artists that are just puzzling through what really matters here. A lot of it comes from the director. And in the case of Kong, the director really wanted to reference back to the original Kong. He kind of wanted to move away from Kong being just a giant gorilla and go back to this idea that Kong is a movie monster. And so Kong walks upright. And he has this sort of gorilla features, but they're actually quite different than a traditional gorilla, including the massive brow, that's so signature to the Willis O'Brien Kong from the 1920s. So we had a lot of fun looking back at that original stop-motion Kong and trying to figure out, okay, how do we now modernize that, but still make it feel like a real thing, but not just a gorilla. And also, not all these other gorillas you've seen in movies recently.
Right.
And it's quite a challenge. But
does it begin with pen and paper?
Always, yeah. It always becomes there were so many different concepts for what that Kong could be. And you always want to start in a medium where you can iterate very quickly, because by the time you get into doing computer graphics work, it's quite slow. And when you add in all of the hair development on Kong, the sort of fun statistic is we also did the bear that's in The Revenant, and Kong had more hair on just his head than the entire bear that was in the other movie. So every problem we try and solve seems like it just scales exponentially on the next one.
So you mentioned the hair, and I sort of alluded to the special teams that you have, at ILM. One thing I've learned in looking into what your background is, there are actual hairdressers or hairstylists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have people that focus solely on certain disciplines. Like some people are modelers and they sort of create the basic shapes. Some people are texture artists and they sort of define all the materials. And then there's some people that all they do is sculpt and groom hair on our creatures. Because you can do a lot, through tools within the computer, but a lot of it is still hand sculpted. And you kind of have to have an eye for how hair should look. And in particular, on Warcraft, we had quite complicated braids and hairstyles that we actually had the hair department on the film create for us so that we could try and mimic those.
You mean the real hair department?
The real hair department. They actually bought wigs and braided them for us and showed us what cool orc braids might look like. So that was great, because by the time we start doing it, it takes months and months to iterate, whereas they could very quickly sort of try out different ideas.
This is like the intersection of real life and...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All the time. And I think that's one thing, it's important to remember, like even in visual effects, it's always an intersection with what they do on set. So we work with the makeup artist to figure out okay, which pieces should be prosthetics and which pieces should we handle, and how do we want this to look, or in this particular case, what should their hairstyles actually be. And
for instance, you use motion capture, so you use the real actor to create facial expressions or body movements or things like that.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I'll show you a quick example, because I actually brought a few, because this is definitely another good one that's fun to see. So this next piece is actually the test that we did to start off Warcraft. And I think what's really fun about it is that traditionally I think actors have felt like they put on all this stuff and then we sort of throw it away and we keyframe everything. But our goal on this project was really that the performance you see in the upper left with the actor is what we then see on the character. So I'll just play this. And it's quite fun to see like how close they are. And a big part of this in particular was the fact that we actually track it how the eyes move. And having the eyes movement come from the real actor makes such a huge difference in terms of believing the performance that you see there. Yeah. So those two things that are sitting out in front of his face are actually two cameras. And each of those cameras records video of the face that we then use to track and map onto our actor.
So you're kind of humanizing this
Absolutely.
Creature in a way.
Absolutely.
So are these motion capture actors, are they specific to motion capture, or some of them, do they cross over into?
There's definitely people that have made a career out of doing motion capture, and that's what they've primarily focused on. But what was fun about this project was that all of the actors were traditional actors. So they didn't come from a motion capture background, but they all had to go through like a boot camp of how to move like an orc, which was quite funny. And this film we actually shot here in Vancouver. And a lot of it was actually out in Burnaby.
How do you
so probably right around the corner from you.
Moving like an orc, so you can kind of just make that up.
Yeah, they actually had a motion coach. His name was Terry Notary, and he sort of trained each actor on how you can't just sort of walk like you normally do. If you're going to be a 400-pound orc, you have to sort of squat down lower and move slower. So it's really neat to see how that actually translates into the characters.
So just, we were talking about the intersection between real life and virtual life, I guess, and there's also the intersection of traditional methods and modern methods, and you do have to use both. Like you're not ditching the old traditional methods of visual effects. No,
and I think a lot of what we're trying to do is actually enable filmmakers to work with tools that they feel very comfortable with. So if somebody comes from a very strong on-set background and knows how to operate camera, if we're doing a big digital film with them, we try and make a camera that they use on the motion capture stage that feels just like a real one. And what was really interesting about this film in particular was that we had the motion capture performers on a live action set. So it had tents and it had trees and it had all the stuff in the background. And so we could shoot it with the camera, and all the cameras were also tracked. And then once the director had a performance of the orcs that he liked, we could have them step aside. And now he could still see the orcs virtually through the viewfinder.
Right.
So you could go get coverage while the actors are off taking a break. Right. And you just play the same performance over and over again. So it was really quite an unusual way to make a film, but I think technology-wise it was quite interesting.
So you can have actors doing their job on the set without, for instance, Kong there, but they're reacting to Kong. I mean...
Yeah. That's the hardest part, is when you have a character that's 100 feet tall, and for the actors to know where to look. So we did everything from, we had sort of a very cheap like iPad version of Kong where you could look through it and then you'd see about how tall he is, and then we'd say, okay, look kind of at that tree or that rock. Right. We had a balloon that we would just send up 100 feet.
For the actors to look at?
For the actors to look at. Because if their eye line is wildly off, you can definitely tell, and it's very hard to fix after the fact. So, if they're watching Kong sort of step over them, it's quite tricky to figure out, like, okay, how fast should they turn their head?
And for the cameras to know.
That's right.
How to frame the shot.
Yeah. I would say on set you take your best shot at it, but a lot of times it's not exactly what you need. And so we end up, everywhere we go, they film it, and then we also shoot photography of the sky and the trees and everything, and then we can extend the shot further if we need to for Kong, so we can reframe it.
So you're doing all these little pieces, this piece here, this piece here, this piece here, and when do you actually put it all together and see it all, how it's supposed to be laid out?
It's a really long process. you first start by going on set and you shoot the movie, whether it's on green screen or live action. And what was really fun about Kong was that, actually I think I brought an example. So with Kong, this is, I'm going sort of backwards. This is like once we're back actually doing the animation. But the background here was all shot in Vietnam. And it was actually, we were there for 6 weeks. And it was one of the largest productions that had been in Vietnam in quite some time. Mm-hmm. And it was really amazing to be able to go there so that it wasn't all just green screen. You were like shooting out on location. And I think for the actors to be in that environment really helped them sort of get into the movie.
I see that he's in water right now.
Yeah.
That was a challenge for you guys to deal with. So
huge.
Explain how that works.
Well, all of the water that you see that Kong interacts with all has to be completely replaced, because when we shot this scene, there was a beautiful pool there, but it didn't move. So when we get back to ILM, we first do the animation, and then we do the hair simulation. And in this particular case, the hair has to interact with the water.
Right.
So it becomes an even more complicated simulation for us. And at any point, the animator, could put his arm in the water, and now all of a sudden it needs to look like wet hair. And that's an entirely different setup. So the level of complexity gets pretty crazy pretty fast. But it is great. So much of our job is on the computer after the fact, but we also do go out to location and we shoot aerial plates. Like this one was in Ha Long Bay. And it's in the film, sort of the entrance to Skull Island.
Right.
And the fact that our job sort of includes this whole range of movie making to post-production, I think is one of the most exciting things about it.
So when you do, these iconic creatures like Kong and Transformers and the Avengers, because you've got a clip of that as well.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, everyone knows them. They have this idea, especially when you're dealing with characters like the Avengers. Everyone has an opinion. Those fans are very strongly opinionated.
Yes, and they let you know through the power of the internet.
Yeah, what has their reaction been to?
Luckily, with the Avengers, we were incredibly nervous. It was actually the second time ILM had done the Hulk. And we were incredibly nervous about taking it on, but we were also very excited because the technology in terms of how the skin had progressed, in terms of looking more realistic and hair looked more realistic, had come a long way. But the best part about the Avengers was that the director, who was Joss Whedon, decided we really want to incorporate the actor into this character. Because traditionally there's sort of been Banner and then the Hulk looks, it's sometimes a completely different actor.
Yeah.
Right. And so for us, our Hulk was sort of one of the first ones where you could actually see the actor in the Hulk, even though it was fully digital. And so in that particular case, we had our on-set reference like we always do. My favorite on the Avengers, though, was he was incredibly dedicated. All we had him on set for was to paint him green and have him walk around. And flex his muscles, and it's pretty hilarious.
Well,
to see.
If you got them,
we did. But when we're going to create our CG Hulk, having something like this to look at is so important because it answers a lot of the sort of art questions for us. But in this particular case, the actor Mark Ruffalo actually let us do scans and life casts and dental molds, and so even the Hulk's fingerprints are the actor's fingerprints.
Really.
Yeah.
You get down to that little detail.
You do, because the human eye is incredibly perceptive at when something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people can sort of relate to when they see a digital character and it's like, something's not quite right there. Like the eye movement looks a little glassy, or they have that sort of 1,000-yard stare, or the skin looks a little plasticky. And those are very, very tough challenges for us to overcome. So we're always grateful to the actors that lend us all of this amazing data.
So what is there one characteristic or human characteristic or creature characteristic, I guess, that would be the most challenging?
I think it's all difficult, but absolutely, like the movement of the face is probably the most difficult thing to get right.
To make look lifelike.
And one of the problems there is is that it's so interconnected. What we found when we did a lot of facial capture for Warcraft is if we'd captured one performance and then we started trying to change it into something else, like, let's have the brows a little bit different or maybe the smile a little bigger, it started to fall apart. And what you realize is that the face is this incredibly complex, interconnected system, that every expression you do has a lot of subtlety in terms of how you arrive at that expression and how you move to the next one. And then it's all connected to the eyes. So it's been fascinating for us to really get into a lot of this research in terms of how do we accurately create these performances.
So when you go and watch a movie that you haven't worked on, are you able to just sit and enjoy the movie, or are you like breaking it down?
It's so much better to not work on a movie because then you're not sort of emotionally attached to how difficult the work was.
Do you have kids who watch your movies?
Yes, and they're 8, and they're very frustrated that they can't see any of the movies that I've worked on. So I am very much looking forward to a kids movie one of these days.
But there are times when you don't even really see the movie until it's out.
No, I mean, a lot of times we see pieces. Usually as we get later in post-production, they'll have us come down just so we can understand the context of the whole film. And that's always really good part of the process.
Do you see movies that are not heavy on the visual effects?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's important too because there's often so many good ideas that you want to borrow from those films that are executed without visual effects that are completely applicable to how we make things look more real.
Are there, the movies that you've worked on are, these big, huge visual effects, obviously, heavy movies. Can it be too much though? Can it go too far?
I mean, I think they all serve different purposes. I mean, certainly a lot of the films I've worked on are these sort of big summer blockbusters where you expect that level of sort of visual complexity and action. But we just worked on A Quiet Place, which was a much smaller film, but for us, it's always about sort of serving the story, if it's a big part of it or a small part of it.
And the technology, how long have you been in the industry now?
I started at ILM almost 17 years ago.
Almost 17 years ago. Okay, and so look 17 years ahead. What more do you think could be done? Because you've already come so far from 17 years ago to now, and the things you can do now, I'm not sure you can make these things even more realistic than they are.
I think it's always going to continue to be like things will just get there faster. The things that took us, the first time I started to create a character rigging, which is to put all the bones and things inside of it, I had 6 weeks to do it. And now we would turn around a normal biped in half a day. And so if you sort of extend that out, the things that take us a very long time and are quite challenging now will get easier and easier, and then you'll be able to try and approach the next problem. And I think that's what's really exciting in the industry right now is that visual effects is very tied into what's happening in gaming, and with all the work on real-time rendering is very tied into what's happening with AI developments, and we're starting to incorporate that into our work. So it's amazing how much feeds into visual effects, but you can imagine 17 years from now you can shoot a movie with no blue screens, and you can recreate people's facial performances that just from massive sets of data that you're able to capture. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things coming.
Is there a character that you haven't done yet that you'd like to do?
I'm sure there's a lot of them. You don't get to do them all, but I feel very lucky for the ones that I've been able to take a shot at.
Do you have a favorite?
Of the ones that I've worked on,
yeah.
It's like picking your favorite child. They're all so fun. I mean, when I got to work on Optimus Prime, I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever. That I completely grew up with Transformers, and then to be able to do the Hulk after that is just incredible. So I think that is one of the fun things about being at ILM is you do get to work on a lot of these amazing films.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That was really fun.
Jeff White, everyone. I believe you're going to be doing some Q&A downstairs, but if anyone has a quick question, if anyone does have a quick question, we do have some time. We have two. One at the very back and one here. That's what I can see right now anyway.
We're going to run.
Hang on. Could you hear that?
Barely.
Okay, we do have a
Optimus Prime
microphone.
the best, so I think our question's answered.
We're going to take the first question here.
Okay.
I just wondered, it looks like you can create amazing fake news with this as well. You could have anyone say anything.
Yeah.
Do you see that coming up, and what effect would that crossover have between these technologies? We can now create evidence that isn't evidence.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big sort of issues we have to deal with as a society, because it's going to sort of take away this thing of video being ground truth, right? And we've been doing that for a while, but the work that we do takes so long and it costs so much money that it's not something people are going to do casually. But now I think you're starting to see that at a certain resolution, people are able to manipulate images in really convincing ways. And it will be quite difficult to tell then, what's real at that point.
Okay, we did have a question in the back. I'm not sure if the microphone got to her.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you had pointed to me. My apologies. I didn't mean to jump out of queue.
Oh, no.
No, loved Optimus Prime. I actually took my boys to see that. So you had asked him whether you'd gone to the theaters and seen the reaction in the theaters of people. That was a pivotal moment. I don't think I've ever been in a theater where the whole theater stood up and cheered when Optimus changed that first time. And did you get to experience that, the interaction of the audience?
Yeah, it's always, they always have screenings for the cast and crew, but that's the worst people to watch the film with because everybody's so exhausted and have lived through the process. It's so much better just to go to the theater, and I'll go with my kids. My stepkids are older, and so I much prefer that. Like when we went to see Avengers, when you watch it by yourself, you're like, oh, that was pretty good. But then when you go to an audience and you see people laugh at these sort of pivotal moments in the film, it's really great. And it is pretty strange to see a character that you are working on then be on backpacks at Target. But starting to get used to it. I guess there's no Target here. Canadian Tire.
There was once. Didn't really work out.
Thank you both so much. That was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.